So what I'd like to start with is, I think Europe has a lot of problems. And I'm not just talking about politically. I think it transcends through to entrepreneurship and startup life. A lot of entrepreneurs starting out, they don't want to be in Europe. You know, Europe is a fragmented market. It's very difficult to launch in a number of languages. America has consolidated, it's sexy, there's access to capital. So what would you guys say that the East and the West and Europe has that can appeal to young startup entrepreneurs before they get on a plane to Silicon Valley?
For us, this was a practical question, right? So basically, I think like if my company would be in San Francisco, we would be rated by Google and Facebook for talent straight away. I think we have like various amazing developer talent in Eastern Europe. If you look, for example, at Yandex, the Russian search engine, some of the features they've got, you know, that's stuff Google dreams about. So I think it's a matter of perception, partly. I think there is amazing talent in Eastern Europe, but it's not really visible there. And for us, you know, when we talked and had to justify why we're here, I said, you know, like our developers don't need to cost 400,000 K. And you know, we actually have here the space and the creative space as well to try out and be much more wilder than I need to raise a 3 million seed funding just to attract the best talent in Silicon Valley situation right now. So we, at least, there are some disadvantages, but we see a lot of advantages around here. I'm not.
Actually, if I can comment on that. So I agree the market is amazing, and I started talking about that big market, huge growth, a lot of customers with increasing purchasing powers. In terms of the resources on the market, I actually find that they're actually quite expensive. I was in San Francisco the other day, and we were talking with the founder of a startup comparing the cost of a web designer in Moscow and in San Francisco. And I actually started thinking that maybe I should outsource to San Francisco because it seems to be cheaper to have web designers there. So there are amazing talents, very qualified people. And also the market has a lot of opportunity because a lot of startups do not exist there. I think especially in Russia, the startup scene is very underdeveloped. So if you have an idea, it's actually Russia is probably one of the best markets to realize it because you're going to have very few competitors. But in terms of finding the right resources, I also think that it's going to be challenging because they're not very cheap unless you go maybe outside of Russia. I will be. I've
never heard of that before. A designer cheaper in Silicon Valley than Russia. Wow, let me have them.
No, I think you're totally right. I think money, when it comes to resources, especially when we're talking about Moscow, it's definitely not the case. I mean, you can rent offices in the city center of Moscow where you most probably pay 10 times more than you pay here in Berlin. And I think you're definitely on the same level like you're in New York. What I think might be the most interesting part of why you should actually go to Russia is that, you know, no matter what, the Russians are going to copy it anyway. So your idea will be in Russia, no matter if it's Facebook, if it's Pinterest, Twitter, whatever. There is always a Russian version of that, and I think it works quite well. Yes. And the big comparison is, for me, either, you know, do you want to go to the US, where you have like a really, really established market, where there is a lot of competition, where you have a growth, but it's more a steady growth, or would you like to go to Russia, where you have, one of the 4 brick markets that's really emerging? And what we see from our clients, which are sometimes like really big international companies, and how they shift budget, then of course they're more interested in investing in Russia, where you would fight for 10% market share, than investing heavily in Western Europe, where you are trying to fight for 1% market share.
I think the good news is that VCs have finally started to put Russia on the map, probably helped by the IPO of Mail.ru and Yandex. But 2 years ago, getting some funds in Russia was actually really complicated. Now we have queues of investors willing to invest into OZON, and I'm sure we're definitely not the only ones. So if you want to come to Russia, you may actually even find it easy to get some funds. Maybe not some web designers, but the funds should be okay.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of general tendency to kind of put Eastern Europe somewhere kind of underneath the Western Europe, because the Western Europe is the kind of the leader, in innovation.
That's very nice of you to say. Thank you.
Well, the truth is that it isn't really. I mean, I think it's a kind of quite a segmented, kind of group. I mean, and I think, and obviously because economically it has a kind of much stronger, and obviously especially the Balkans and Russia. I mean, the political changes and the kind of historical changes have made, but innovation usually does arise from these kind of regions. This is where the kind of the first things have kind of come from. I mean, if we look at kind of at least in kind of history of art, I mean, we know that the modernism kind of kicked off in Russia. I mean, we know that most of the modernist ideas were actually best demonstrated and happened in Eastern Europe. Whilst the kind of the Western Europe kind of tended to kind of skim over some of these ideas, and if we look at least, and if we talk about technology and we talk about innovation in technology, it is actually where kind of it is Eastern Europe when these things can really truly happen, because this is where the people don't have much to lose in that sense.
But yeah.
And it's about building those bridges, and I think what everyone's role is in this kind of instance is actually building bridges between Europe and.
And yeah, I think that's also put the finger on one of the biggest problems. Europe, we're still at war with each other. Politically and in technology. At San Francisco Airport now, there's a massive banner advert for London's tech city. And Berlin are trying to make it the next Silicon Valley, and Barcelona, and in Russia you've got Skolkovo?
Yes.
Which is like this big tech city that they're trying to build, and going to be the next Silicon Valley. How can we persuade both the government and the tech communities in each city that we can't fight? We can't do that if we're going to save Europe. We need to kiss and make up. We need to work together, both politically and in the technology world.
I think I think it is really about building those bridges, and I think it's about connecting people and kind of exposing people and getting people to kind of work together. And I think through that, I think that's the only way they can resonate through kind of both in Western and Eastern Europe. And I think it'll be difficult to kind of erase the borders, and I think that will always be there. But I think it's also the internet itself has made things. I mean, we can see that kind of the effects. We can see the kind of the entrepreneurial kind of spirit, in Eastern Europe, and that is we're just going to see more and more of that.
And in Russia, you're not helping Berlin's version of your company launch. You're keeping it strictly to Russia. You're not launching in any other language in any other country in Europe. Why not?
I think the Russian market is big enough, basically, for us to focus our attention on it. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, when they start, despite the fact that we're not starting, but anyway, we made $300 million turnover last year, which we would consider as still a small turnover for a business model like ours. I think a lot of small entrepreneurs at the beginning want to do too many things at the same time, and because of that, they end up not doing very well all of these things. So for us, Russia is such a huge opportunity that we don't really need to go anywhere else. We open in Kazakhstan and Belarus, but that's basically our natural Russian-speaking market.
I actually asked some of my Russian friends, just yesterday, as a preparation of this panel, so what do you think about Berlin? And I think the summary was, to them, like, we really don't get the Berlin hype. To them, Berlin is a second-class startup city.
They're Russian.
Yeah, they're Russian. So, but basically, what I'm saying is, like, they really don't get the new, right? The things like friendship economy, which the European or Western European media have talked about. I think that's big, that's significant. I think startup Berlin doubled in growth in the last 2 years or so. But like, I think there's other like, they go straight to the States, right? If you look like for guys like doodle jump guys, right? They moved to New York, like Philippe Levine from Evernote. If you ask him where he lives, he tells you, right, it's the Silicon Valley, right? So that's the natural jump. I think when you have other countries, like now I see Grzegorz now in the front stage over there, like I think the Poles, for example, I know they increasingly look there, right? Because I read his blog and read some of his conversations there, and I think where you have a couple other tech startup communities, but they connecting to Berlin only these days.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that's a kind of I think there's a kind of catch-up game taking place at the moment, and I think and it is kind of driven by the kind of the market, and there is a kind of startup, the thing happening, all over the world, and I think. And Silicon Valley is the place where these things kind of get, they flower. But at the same time, I think, I'm kind of particularly, I think it resonates interested in those kind of individuals actually working themselves and trying to build and innovate. And I think that's where, that's what kind of at least the blog tried to do, and that's what the kind of Resonate the festival tries to do, is to kind of infuse that kind of willingness or eagerness to go and explore new things and try new things. And I think that that's probably a criticism as well on the kind of startup scene. I don't think there's enough innovation. And even though there's a lot of kind of money changing hands, and I think money is changing hands for the kind of the next big thing. Whilst the next big thing is actually, there isn't much of it, unfortunately.
There isn't a big thing in Berlin or Russia. A next big thing.
No, not yet. I don't think. And I think when we spend, I do spend quite a lot of time. I think most of the innovation actually happens in very small circles, in very small circles of, what's been referred to, as the seniors. There's a kind of group of individuals that actually, don't have monetary kind of aims or gain, that they're trying to kind of, benefit financially from this, but actually from pure kind of interest and inquisitive nature. And I think, it's that kind of inquisitive nature that actually drives innovation rather than, the funding, which I kind of tend to.
I tend to disagree. I think like. You ask us to Cora.
Where are the boxing gloves? Anyone?
I think, for example, like what inspires me like a company is like Yandex, right? We basically IPO'd last year in New York, and now they have like Yandex Labs in Palo Alto with 20 people. And
yeah, they're actually sponsoring a lot of American events, but nobody knows what it is because it's always in Russian.
Yeah, but it's because I think they'll have a big launch coming up this summer. But what I'm saying is like, when I'm in Eastern Europe, and maybe this is what you see, like I say so much young, talented kids, like it's the iron wall broke down, and these kids really took digital, right? They're 30-somethings, they're super talented. In my view, they're a lot of times more talented than kids here because they don't have parental control, right? There was nobody beyond there who's old enough to put them down, right? When I go to Onet in Poland, right, these kids are rocking it, right? And I think that's amazing. And I think the big next step will probably not even be like, it doesn't need to be like the small startups because most of them will go to the Silicon Valley anyway. But I think you have the big hitters like Yandex who need to take the next jump. And the kids who are there, a lot of them are awesome.
No, they are, but if you think about the number of Russian, again, I'm going to talk about what I know, which is Russia. If you talk about the Russian startup scene, I can probably name them all in like 30 seconds. I don't think I can do that about San Francisco. I can't do that, I think, about Berlin, probably because I don't know Berlin that well, but still. So I think, yes, there are a lot of smart kids and people willing to do things, but for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to end up with a lot of startups creating new ideas. And I don't know why. Maybe lack of fun, maybe lack of entrepreneurial history, like benchmark, like you can look up at them and say, oh, I want to be like the next Russian Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know, something like that. But as a fact, it's that they're there, but they don't do these startups.
I think it's the cultural kind of changes, that they somewhat they lack, that kind of context, which is kind of what I'm kind of trying to refer to, is this kind of very sudden changes in ways of thinking, ways of kind of dealing, ways of communicating, in management, and people kind of find it difficult to kind of position themselves and work with that, and that's usually the thing that drives innovation, rather than. And I think that's probably a criticism of Western Europe. There isn't that much because everyone's too comfortable in that,
I think like one of the big things when it's about building the bridge from east to west is actually in our mind, and I think that's the even bigger problem than VC money and the government, because there are so many people. For them, you know, the map of Europe looks just completely different than it is in reality. So when I'm boarding a plane in Vienna, I'm in 2 hours in Moscow. I'm in 2 hours 20 in London. So it's actually shorter for me to go to Moscow than going to London. And I think it's also things like saying, okay, Yandex is now in North America, but they do everything in Cyrillic. And that's the kind of thing that a lot of other companies are doing in Russia. And then they're thinking about, okay, why do my service fail? You know, why can't I succeed in the Russian market? And you also need to adapt to the local changes. And I think this is where, on the one hand, the East can learn a lot from the West, but also the other way around. And I think that the East is actually in a way much more comfortable position, because they are learning, and they're learning really, really fast. And I think the big problem that we have in the West is that we first need to learn to unlearn to be able to learn again. And that's the huge barrier that we have, because we are comfortable, you know, we have all our wealth, we have all a nice and cozy job, and we live very well. So there is a very, very little thing that pushes us to go harder. And in Eastern Europe, you have so many young people, great talents, that are just really, really hungry to do things. And this is really great. And they do it in their own way, and they will do it in a different way that we are used to it. And it will be also our responsibility to actually change and adapt to things that are happening in the East.
And I wouldn't be surprised also that we begin to see kind of more and more startups actually moving to Eastern Europe, you know, to work in that kind of context.
So you're basically saying the west of Europe is obese and lazy?
No, it's not.
No, I am joking.
Not in this room.
Steve Jobs, you know, Steve Jobs said, "Stay hungry, stay foolish," and I think it's almost a problem with America. You know, there's a lot of people that have first world problems, and I think in Silicon Valley, at least, you know, a lot of the startups I'm seeing are not solving problems that are changing the world. They're solving first world problems like, "Hey, where's my nearest cupcake, and how can I share that with my friends?" You know, so I think actually sometimes the problems being solved by entrepreneurs in emerging markets and around the world are bigger world-changing and life-changing problems than some of the problems being solved in Silicon Valley. Unfortunately, money is sexy, and photo sharing apps do get sold for $1 billion like Instagram. But so what do you guys want to see? If Berlin and Russia made love and had a big tech baby, what would that look like? What do you want to see? Obviously not an obese baby.
No, I think what would be really interesting is there is a lot of creative talent in Berlin. There's a lot of talent in Russia. I think it would be great if they would mix up even more. I think the biggest challenge why it's not happening at the moment is that currently, talking just again about Russia, is that still the general atmosphere is pretty unfriendly to open up a business and to be a startup. I think there are a lot of changes going on. Anyway, if we look to Russia, what's happening over the last months with the election, you can really feel that change. And I think it's right now just in the beginning. And I think Russia will definitely reach out more to the West. And I think we should just not be ignorant and see it actually as a great opportunity to build something together and to also learn from the East.
I would like to see the same environment as you have here in Berlin in terms of regulation, legislation, in terms even of work environment, you know, like just finding an office is easy. So all of that, and I would like to see that with the engineering skills that the Russian people have. And their capacity to overcome any problems you put in front of them, because they're extremely good at solving problems. So if we could get a baby like that, I would assume the father would be Germany and the mother Russia, because they have really beautiful girls there, and that should do a pretty awesome baby.
I hope it gets harder in Eastern Europe. No. But I think it's, you know, seeing kind of, you know, having kind of run, you know, the first, you know, festival this year, and, you know, and seeing how, how much people actually enjoy coming, to Belgrade. People coming from Western Europe, people that work in Western Europe and visiting Belgrade and being in that kind of context and atmosphere and so on. I mean, whether it's Moscow, whether it's Belgrade, whether it's, they're really, really wonderful cities. They're culturally rich cities. It's not just about visiting, but actually being in that kind of context. And they're very inspiring cities. And I would like to see at least more people coming to these things that are happening in Eastern Europe, visiting and seeing what's happening in, there, and try to kind of exchange, to learn from, again, to build those bridges. So.
I think, partly I think it's awareness. Again, when I asked my friends in Russia, what's wrong with Berlin, they said German language. And I think, would they have not...
Russian language is so easy, yes.
I think would they not really aware about is this, the set of panels which we had before about the friendship economy and the international startups here. You don't need to speak German in Berlin. Big news. I don't think the Russians understand that. And I think, I had a couple of Russian friends figuring out whether they should put headquarters here. And I think some of them may come. But I think, just to talk a little bit more about the status quo, I think we have a rocket internet that's plus 15,000 employees here. Probably double the amount from 12 months ago or a little bit more. And we have also Team Europe, over 1,000 people. These guys are all doing things in Eastern Europe and putting, whether you like them or not, they put investment money into startups there. And I think that's pretty significant. And the question is, there's always the cycles of entrepreneurs. And, the best investors and your advisors are the entrepreneurs themselves. And I think we just need time. I think, you just need these people need to make some money to grow as people and then keep on giving back to the community, just like in the Valley.
Yesterday, after the startup session, a young entrepreneur came up to me Hermione, have you seen any investors? I can't find any. So they must be here, but I think they're hiding. But does Russia have the same investment climate? Are you funding your startups?
We are, personally, no, we are not founding startups yet because we haven't found any interesting business plan. We have been looking for them. So
that's why you need to move to Berlin.
So if you have any interesting ideas for us, we do have money. We closed a $100 million fundraising in September last year, so we still have a bit of money to spend on new ideas. But this being said, as I mentioned earlier, there are more and more VCs which are interested in Russia. And they are definitely ready to pay and to invest for new ideas and invest into companies. So I think finding money at the moment in Russia is not the problem it used to be 2 years ago.
And in Europe, it seems like different cities have different benefits. London was really good at mobile, sort of 3 years ago. Barcelona also, lots of mobile. So what does Russia and Berlin have that's specific to Berlin? I know, SoundCloud came out of Berlin. It's the music capital of the world. So obviously music's a big thing here, but I don't really know in terms of products and technology what the kind of startups are that are coming out of the cities.
Well, I think Berlin is just, for a startup, interesting in general. So I think there is just a lot happening. I think when it comes to startups, you can't really say, there is one category that comes out of one city. I think Berlin will become a central hub for startups within Europe.
What kind of startups?
Well, all kinds of startups. I think, ideas are unlimited. And, SoundCloud, for example, they are based in Berlin. They are not based in the US. And it's the same with Gitzi. So you see that, it doesn't matter where the idea comes from. It can flourish everywhere when you have the right people at the right time. You don't need to go necessarily to Silicon Valley. Even it might be easier there, but you can also do it in Berlin. And I think hopefully you can do more things than in the future in the rest of Eastern Europe. And I think at the moment what Russia really has is a lot of money coming out of resources. And they definitely need to spend that money. So I think there is a lot of money coming in or being produced in Russia, and they can spend it on startups if they are smart, and not on continuing the oil production. So I think everything can flourish there.
I think consumer startups, I think not only SoundCloud, right? I think if you do a great product, Berlin loves you back. And I think like even if you look at the numbers, right? I think like a lot of the international startups and us included, we think actually Berlin is the coolest place on earth. So we actually expect London and New York and San Francisco to follow suit in trends. And if you're a little bit more mathematical like me, I actually look at the Amazon top list and I see like whatever we listen to here is cool in San Francisco a month later.
You're so cool.
I lived in San Francisco, right? I love San Francisco to bits, but I think like in terms of socially interesting place where socially interesting things happen, like I think Berlin is awesome, and I think there's a lot. And if you look at as with your background in tech blogs, right? How hard is it for startups in San Francisco right now to get attention if you do something new? It's super hard. It's an oversaturated market to me, like in this attention.
Right, but you're kind of contradicting yourself because earlier you said 80% of your customers and partners are in America.
Yeah, the big money is there, right? Just like in London, I think like London has. If you're like really making money like us in Europe, you have to go hop on EasyJet twice per month, and to go to London and this highway around London, right, where all the big corporates are, tech corporates are. And for us, we need to talk to our big partners, and they're all in San Francisco, so this is where we're actually making money. But like the consumers are everywhere.
I think that's the problem. That's where you're making money. When is the point in time going to come where your 80% of your customer base is in Berlin? You don't have to go to Silicon Valley.
Our money is like B2B. So like for us, we need Google and Facebook and all these guys to show up here and have headquarters. So this will not happen anytime soon. But like I think for consumer startups, like if you look at like the folks who need advertising and many other things, they do great money here. And they get great audiences here, right?
But rather than getting the American companies, and also this is a question for Russia, why do European startups focus on just producing a startup in that country? Why don't you launch in different languages in different countries in Europe rather than going to the American market? Is it because it's too difficult? Is it because the American market's much easier? Why is that?
We're actually, if you look at our biggest competitor, Apple, Chomp, which got bought by Apple, and Krzykowski, which is invested by Eric Schmidt, they don't have a technology which supports multiple languages. So we actually, because we're here, we actually think about multiple languages, multiple cultures. We studied different patterns of how do people search differently for apps in different countries. So I think it's like I think with different places you change your perspective and you launch different. And for us, it's a big advantage. So we did that, right? We have a international strategy on all of these things.
In Russia, you're not launching in German, you're not launching your product in Italian. I mean, for me, I don't know if I'm being retarded here, but it would make sense to go after the smaller markets in Europe to make up the bigger picture.
I think the big picture is already in Russia. I think making it even bigger for us means getting the risk of, trying to catch a pie too big for us. So I think Russia is a huge market. And you were asking before, what is the key, how do you see the tech scene evolve in Russia or in Europe in general? I think for Russia, the next key step is more customer-centric companies, more customer-centric startups. I think Russia in particular, and I would say probably Eastern Europe in general, is discovering that being friendly with a customer is actually a very good marketing tool. And
congratulations.
So a lot of companies are actually step by step developing this customer-focused I would say behavior or customer-focused strategy. What that means, by the way, in Eastern Europe and in Russia in particular, is that we can't be 100% online businesses. So if we talk about OZON, for example, a large part of our business is handling calls. because our customers, now being used to what it is to do online shopping, want to have a human being on the phone. And so we have a 24-hour call center with operators that will not only take your calls, but they will also call you to confirm that you did press the button to put your order. And so yes, we do have your order, and yes, we're going to process it. And this approach is because customers are now used to online shopping, and as we discovered that having a customer-centric approach is the key to success, we need to do that. We need to be there for them. And so really, I think the tech scene in the future for Russia is going to be about customer-focused companies.
And education.
And education of customers. Yes.
I think it would be nice to kind of, probably put less emphasis on kind of funding and money, because I don't think money drives innovation. I think it's the actual education and the social changes that drive innovation. I think if it's going to happen kind of anyway, it will happen in Eastern Europe. And yeah, go on.
I just find it kind of sad that we have to educate Europeans.
I don't think we have to educate Europeans. I think it's about...
we do. It's up to the tech community to educate Europeans. In America, you'll find a 90-year-old grandma sitting at the airport swiping an iPhone. You don't find that in Europe.
Well, I think you find something different. I think you can't say it that way. I mean, you need to look at the history and you need to look at the culture. And if you do that, then you understand that actually it's a big thing still for people, if we talk about Russia in your example, to give somebody online your credit card number because of the fraud. And you just don't have this trust in institutions, basically because of the history. So that's a huge thing. But I think what you also see even more is that I think not every grandmother in the US is running around with an iPad. But I think what you see more often in Eastern Europe is that people maybe have an iPad as their first computer, what they have, or they don't have a fixed internet line at home. They already start with, just having mobile internet on the go. And that's the interesting part. They just jump into on a completely different stage in the learning curve. And I'm pretty sure that Germany is one of the countries in Europe where you have a lot of DSL lines still, way much more DSL internet connections than in Eastern Europe, because it was not available before, and now everybody has mobile internet.
I think that there's probably a misunderstanding. That the technology has been running side by side, Eastern and Western Europe for a very long time, and I recall, Galaxia, which was kind of one of the first kind of home market aimed computers, which was released about the same time as Apple. There were things, even though they were kind of close, countries, very much to the West, that actually technology was developing very much side by side. So there aren't any, I don't think they're technologically backwards in any way. I don't think there is any difference in terms of how we, relate to technology, Eastern Europe, how people relate to it in Western Europe. I think maybe in terms of kind of shopping and spending money that we do, the kind of consumer kind of culture, is much more developed in Western Europe than it is in Eastern Europe. But in terms of the kind of technology and the relation between people and technology, it's not that much off at all.
I tend to agree with you. I think there's this phrase in the Valley called "you have to have your head in the cloud and both feet on the ground," and I'm actually really happy, right? I'm so happy. Like I've been here in Berlin, back from San Francisco, 1.5 years. And the amount of change, new skill sets, new know-how, also new money, like you have American investors looking here, or all the leading UK funds are here and scouting, which are enabling the talent you talked about, right? And this money wasn't here before. And also, like if I look to Poland or some other markets I see, things are like this. Like the only probably tech market in Europe which is more or less stagnating is London, right? It's still the biggest, but all my leading like startup friends from the UK, we are moving over to the States, right? But here, here's a super upbeat atmosphere here in Berlin, and in a lot of the Eastern European countries too, I think.
Okay, great. Well, ending on a positive note here, please give me a big round of applause in thanking all of our panelists. And I think that's our cue to leave.